talk to you about what she's done in her algebra classroom. Miss Terry and I have been working with them, and they're going to talk about that.
Hello, I'm Katie Blanton. Thank you, Cindy. She's been a three-year mentor for me, and she's been there from the beginning. And Nancy's been there this past year for me so many times. But ever since I started the Teach North Texas program, I started off in 5th grade, and I was like, why am I teaching science in a 5th grade classroom? But it ended up being very, very helpful because they're unbiased, and we were doing a lot of hands-on activities, which made more sense to me because they were younger, and it seemed odd to do it in the high school, but going from elementary, then middle school, it just naturally flowed into the high school. So I wanted to show you guys some of the things that I've been doing in my algebra classroom. We've been doing a lot of hands-on activities. I like to get the students engaged because they'll tell me if they're bored. They're like, Miss Blanton, this is boring. I'm like, okay, we have to change things. Everyone stand. So one important part of the SIOP model is preparing the lesson. Don't just walk in and say, oh, I know factoring. I can show them how to factor. One way that you can prepare is beaten into us is the 5E model. And this is one example of what I did for a 5E model one day. To engage them, I started off with something they already knew, which was their warm-up for the binomial product. Like, okay, why are we doing this? We've done it before. Well, then I had a matching activity. So they were working in groups. I gave them a polynomial and then random factors. And they had to figure out which factors went to the polynomial, but I didn't tell them how. So I'd go by and ask those higher order thinking skill questions. Like, well, how are you going to figure out where that last term came from? Think back to when we were doing the warm-up, when we multiplied 3 times 5. What term was that gave you that number? And I'm like, oh, that's so 15. And I was like, okay, but not just that. What about the middle term? And then I walk away. And then they're like trying to put all these matches together. So that's one way that you can get students working together in groups is little activities like that. For the Explain that day, I had a really cool writing sample I'll show you later. And then also algebra tiles. I don't know if you know about algebra tiles, but they're awesome. I just learned about them this year, and the students loved them too. They're like, can we use these on the quiz? Can we use them on the test? Do we get these on the star? I was like, I don't know about star, but I'll let you use them on the test. How about that? So, yeah, it's good. This is my Prezi. I'm still getting used to the smart board. Another way that I've been being more prepared for my lessons, I occasionally like to make YouTube videos for the students, especially if the lesson was a little more difficult or if I know they need more help. This video in particular I just made a couple of days ago. The students were like, we don't get this. Please make a YouTube video. One girl was like writing on the board, she went, YouTube, question mark, while I was talking. I was like, I'll get to it, I'll make you a YouTube video. So here's an example. I gave them a review, and they're able to use this at home to do the review.
Hi everyone,
because
this is Miss Blanton,
sometimes they need the extra help.
I'm going to be working your 9-4-9-7
So
review.
here's a little example.
As you all should know, your review is due on the day of the test, and your test is on Tuesday or Wednesday, depending on if you're A day or B day. As you know, it is a 100 quiz grade if you attempt every single problem. Alright, let's get started. Number 1, circle all of the polynomials that are in factored form. That would be B, that's a factor, that's a factor.
Trying to use those language,
D
the vocabulary,
is a factor.
factor.
And F. B, D, and F are all in factored form.
So a beginning level student can play and replay this
over and over again.
All of the
They hear the
polynomials
words,
that are not in
but they
factored
can
form.
look them up
And
in the
if they are
dictionary too,
already
they don't understand
in
the
factored
term.
form,
And they also
simply
have this
write it
review
down.
in front of them because I gave it to them in class.
Starting with
So
A,
they're not just taking
X
notes
squared
from some
plus
random
5x
YouTube
plus
video.
6
And I've been trying to make the
Sure.
reviews.
equal to 0.
There we go. I've been trying to make the reviews less just problems, and I put more commentary in there. Like, this is very important. You need to know how to factor, and I bold the big words. I don't know if you saw that one. I have a funny story about solving, underline solve, but I'll get to it. So another thing is building background, knowing who your students are, and knowing how you can relate what we're doing to what they need to know. So the four important things that we always need to hit with these ELL students and for all students is to make sure that they are listening, they're speaking, they're reading, and they're writing. So any opportunity that you get to hit those 4 points, hit as many as you can. One struggle I was having with my students is I would give them a polynomial and it specifically says solve the equation, but they were only factoring. I was like, how am I going to get them to recognize the difference? So instead of talking about that, I started off class one day and I said, Joseph, if I gave you ice cream and fruit and told you to blend it, what would you give me? Smoothie? Exactly. You would blend it and you would give me a smoothie. You wouldn't give me a fruit basket or ice cream with fruit on top. You would blend it and give me a smoothie. Same thing for these problems. If they give you a polynomial and they say to solve it, they don't want you to just factor it. They want you to factor it and then solve, because it says solve the equation. And then following that, I would put an example on the board and wrote the directions. Factor the problem. Maria, what are we supposed to do here? Factor, I'm sorry, what did you say? Factor, right, we're going to factor this one and then do another one and solve. So I made a lot of emphasis on factoring and solve. I put the words on the board so that they're seeing it, they're hearing it, and they hear their peers say it too, because I made them repeat it, and they were laughing at me like, your hearing's not that bad, you're only 23. So, but here's an example of a writing sample I took. And at first I was like, I've got to find a good writing sample to put in here where they got it right. And then it's like, wait, that's not what's important to me. What's important is the kids that don't get it. They're the ones I need to make sure they do understand. And if you do writing samples, you can get inside their head and see just exactly where their misconception is. For example, this first question, I asked them about that matching activity we did. Explain how you did the matching activity. She said, you multiply the last terms in the factors to get the last term in the polynomial. You add or subtract the middle terms in the factors to get the middle factors in the polynomial. That's pretty close. That sounds like a good student interpretation of the activity. But for number 2, I said, well, how would you do the activity and find the factors if all I gave you was the polynomial? I didn't give you the factors. And she said, you can factor the polynomial down in a factor tree, example, and then factor each term. Well, obviously that's not correct if you know anything about algebra. So now I know her misconception. So when I see other students doing the same thing, especially the ones that were in her group and trying to do that, I know their misconception and I know how I can re-explain it so that they would understand. So that's the beauty of a writing sample. You have all of your students telling you what's inside their brain. Next up, we have comprehensible input. That's getting different kinds of strategies of giving them the information. The pictures you see here, this is from an activity I did for showing them the difference between the difference of squares and the perfect square trinomial. So they would start off at the first desk that said, well, can you factor out a GCF? The reason I had them all start there is because that is the first step. No matter what kind of polynomial it is, you have to start and say, can I factor out a GCF? If they can, they would go to the next table where they would actually factor out the GCF. And if not, then they skip to the part that says, well, do you have 2 terms or 3 terms? And what happened is I didn't even plan for this to happen, but what happened is I had students grouping at desks, and they never were able to pass to the next one if they didn't know how to do it. So they were grouping at their misconceptions, which was really awesome. So I was able to target them in groups, say, okay, so let's all factor out the GCF. We all need practice on that. So
let's clarify if I could just for a moment.
Yeah.
What Katie had done is she created a flow chart on paper, and then she took that and actually built it in her room with a desk. She physically built the flow chart.
I see.
Okay.
There.
So she took the flow chart that she built, which is a fabulous job aid in itself on paper. Okay, that's great. So that would be like the second step, going from concrete to symbolic or pictorial. Okay, but she took her second step, made it concrete, and then had them walk it, so she's getting the kinesthetic involvement too. Okay, so that's what you're seeing. You're seeing them actually walk the flow chart.
So nowadays in high schools where they have sheltered, algebra sheltered, this is exactly what they do. You know, ESL teachers in algebra, they use the shelter approach.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Right. And this is a mixed class.
Another great thing you can do is putting them in pairs. That suddenly divides your classes in half. Because if one person doesn't understand and the other one does, then they can help each other. If you have two people that don't understand, you're targeting them at the same time. So your class of 24 goes to a class of 12, which is a lot more manageable. I mean, let's picture students engaged. What do you say? They're answering this question, deciding, and they each had their own note card with the polynomial that they're answering their questions about, and they're both responsible for writing it down that day. And I just had a couple more pictures. They were at the point where they were having to figure out the factors to their perfect square trinomial. A lot of students ended up grouping at these desks, so I knew that that was something we needed more coverage on. Whole class engaged. It was awesome. I really enjoyed this. I'll definitely do it again with some improvements. And then one last method. Oh, there it is. We did a dance to help remember how to use the distributive property on square the first, square the last, multiply together, and double it. That was our dance, and they loved it. It was really silly, but with a little bribery of points on a test grade, they let me record them. But a lot of the kids the next day were like, wait, how did the dance go again? And one guy was like, I showed my mom. But it was a lot of fun. It's cool to see the students smiling and up and talking. I've subbed for classes where they all sat quietly. I walked in and they were scared of what I might tell their teacher. Like, I would never want to be in that kind of environment. You know, it doesn't encourage student learning. Another SIOP feature is scaffolding, like Didash was talking about. Taking students from where they are up to where they need to be. And one way that you can do that is, like I said, if you have them in partners, divide your class in half so that you can access more brains in one class period. One of my favorites is Rally Coach. For a warm-up, I had them go back and forth. There's 10 questions. Partner A would work, while partner B made sure they did it correctly, and then they would go back. Partner B would work number 2. So they're both engaged in making sure that those problems are worked correctly. And then for manipulatives, like I was saying, algebra trials are amazing, because you don't need to know much language to make these geometrically correct. Once you get that concept, it's there, and they're begging for me to bring them back, because I rented them from the school. I was like, okay, we'll get them, don't worry. If you're not familiar with them, definitely get familiar with them. If you teach algebra, they're awesome.
And we give you trainings.
We should do trainings, yes. So manipulatives are another great way. But that's pretty much what I've been doing in my algebra classroom. I've seen really, really great output from it. And if you ever have anything you would like to send me, if you have ideas, I only want to do this kind of learning. So please email me your ideas. I love it. Yes,
I have
ma'am.
a question. Okay, so you're dealing with the 5 C's, or the 5
The E's.
E's.
Yes.
And then you're dealing with the SIOP features.
Right.
So you're trying to marry those together. Do you find commonalities?
Oh, yes.
It makes it easier. If you start with SIOP, suddenly you're trying to think of things where they're engaged, because they have to listen or speak or read or write, and you're like, oh, hello, explore, or explain. So the same way that I had that writing sample, that was my explain. They were explaining how they did their explore, which was hands-on group work. So they work hand in hand very well.
So I'm thinking that the engage could also be the building that background knowledge, right?
Yes, and that's
Could be
engaged.
part of that. Oh, that's wonderful.
Yeah, engage is very much about that. Yeah.
Did you take students who are 65 who never got it?
Come on in, I'm in Miss Medina's room, D205, Guy High School.
I want to learn now. This makes
We can
sense.
learn that little, dance.
I'm good at it. Honey, that's the only thing I know how to
In my first period, I have 2, but I have a feeling that there's a few that maybe have just come out, like they were just recently advanced high ELLs, just because of how fluent they are in Spanish, and their English is a little weaker, so I feel like they maybe have been part of it. But I have 2 that are documented through the